Question 3. Which one of the following most logically completes the argument? Pretty much an inference question. You're just going to take the question at face value and try to follow along. What we have is that a century in certain ways is like a life. I'm going to, again, just take that at face value. I suppose everything in certain ways is like everything else, so I won't argue. I mean, it's like a life in that there's a beginning, middle, and end, and it goes over time. And things happen. You don't really have to analyze it this closely. And as the end of a century approaches, people behave toward that century much as someone who is nearing the end of life does toward that life. I believe the word you're looking for is they reflect. Right, they look back, even though they were probably not alive for most of that century, so it's kind of silly, but fine. They act in a similar way looking back. And again, what most logically complete this argument is going to be something that I might find silly because I find that sentence silly, but that's fine. I'm this person's law talking guy. So just as people in their last years spend much time looking back on the events of their life, people at a century's end spend much time looking back on the events of that century. This is, again, what you might call a change-up in the sense of, I mean, the section is supposed to start easy, but this might seem too easy. And really, if someone were to get this wrong, I think it's just because they assume there must be something more going on here than that. There isn't. That's all it's saying is that if X is like Y and you behave towards X like you behave towards Y, that if at the end of X you look back on the events of X, at the end of Y you look back on the events of Y. There's absolutely nothing else going on here. So, A, reminisce about their own lives. That is for people who are just crisscrossing the wires on the analogy. That's fine, that'll happen, but you see what I'm saying where it's saying, you've got your century, and then there's the end, and that makes you look back on the century, and then you've got a life, and the end of that makes you look back on the life. So at the end of a century, as we're talking about here, you will look back on the century, not your life. I dearly hope that doesn't clear anything up for you and that you've already fast-forwarded. How do I get... Oh, it won't go away. Fine. B, fear that their own lives are about to end. Well, this test was in 2007, so that can't be like some Y2K paranoia catcher. But, okay, I'll just call that a distractor. Focus on what the next century will bring. That clearly has nothing to do. I mean, no, that would be the analogy to a religious person at the end of their life, focusing on what will happen to them in the life to come. That is not this argument. Become very interested in the history of the century just ending. Yes, the history of the century just ending would be parallel to the autobiography of the person's life, and reflect on how certain unfortunate events of the century could have been avoided. That would be true if reflecting on your life was entirely about regretting things you could have avoided. It doesn't specify that all human lives are about that, and if you assumed that, getting this wrong is probably the least of your problems.